We stepping up to the pulpit, showing you the wisdom, the employee rights toolkit. Equip employees with the tools they need to speak up for themselves when they stuck in the weeds. Discrimination real, fight back, your employee Miranda right. You can ignite that. EEOs, yeah, we cover them all, making sure you know your rights, it ain't no wonder at all. We stepping up to the pulpit, showing you the wisdom, the employee rights toolkit. This the employee rights toolkit.
What's up? Welcome to the Employee Rights Toolkit, the podcast where we equip employees with the tools they need to speak up for themselves against discrimination. I'm your host and HR consultant, Lady X. I've worked in the HR industry for over 20 years in multiple areas, including benefits, leave of absence, workers' compensation, training, recruiting, HRIS, but my favorite and the one most near and dear to my heart is when I worked in the Equal Opportunity, Equal Access office. In that office, we trained and enforced policies on anti discrimination. We conducted investigations into complaints of discrimination and harassment. And there was something so fulfilling about being a part of the solution and not the problem when it came to discrimination. If you're human, you know that you don't like how it feels to be treated differently because of who you are or what you look like. And so, again, just being a part of fixing that, it was gratifying. And if you heard the intro, the lyrics are very clear. Discrimination is real. So I'm here to make sure that you know your rights. Think about how many times you've been at work and heard someone use a racial slur or use some derogatory term to describe a certain group of people. Better yet, think about how maybe someone has tried you and called you a racial slur or some offensive term. How did you handle it? Did you say anything? If you didn't, you're not alone. You'll be surprised to know that most people who are harassed at work don't say anything. And it's because they fear retaliation, they feel that nothing will be done about it, or maybe they just didn't even know what the process was to file the complaint. But you can find this information in the study that was conducted in 2015 by the EEOC's task force. It'll show you it was 3 out of 4 employees. That's 75% of people who don't say anything. They suffer in silence. And so we have to end that. It's not okay to be silent about discrimination or harassment. So, our toolkit topic today comes from Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act prohibits discrimination in the workplace based on an applicant or employee's race, color, religion, national origin, sex, pregnancy, sexual orientation, and gender identity. It's very important that you know what the characteristics are that are covered by this particular act, because you can't come with a complaint of discrimination because your manager is treating you differently because you dated their ex. That's not a characteristic that fits within this law. It's very clear, very specific that it has to be race, color, religion, national origin, sex, pregnancy, sexual orientation, and gender identity. This law applies to employers with 15 or more employees. And what's important to know about the law is that it requires employers to provide you with a respectful workplace, one that is free from discrimination and harassment. So that means that if there's a complaint or if the employer knows about discrimination and harassment, they have a responsibility to take care of it. They have to address the behavior and do something to stop it. So, we're going to talk about 2 cases where employees tried to get issue resolved and they had to go out externally to get it resolved. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you about steps that you can take when you are on the receiving end of harassing behavior or offensive comments. So, the first thing you want to do is to respond to the behavior. So, if someone is addressing you and calling you some derogatory term, address it right then and there. It doesn't have to be in an aggressive way, and it doesn't have to be like a confrontation. You can just let them know, hey, my name's not Monkey Boots, my name is X. Or if you are too upset to say something like right then, cool off, come back the next day, but say something to that person. Not only should that stop the behavior right away, it stops it from progressing and getting worse. Usually, when people get away with that toxic behavior and use those terms, they continue to do it because no one has said anything to them. So, by calling it to their attention early on, it puts them on notice and it should stop the behavior. It tells them this is not okay. So, one, you want to respond to the behavior as soon as possible. The second thing you want to do is document it. So if they said something to you and you let them know that you didn't appreciate it, go ahead and document that transaction, the date, the time, the location, the witnesses that were present. Document that information because if the behavior continues and you need to report it, you already have the steps that you took on your own to get the behavior stopped. So, reporting the behavior would be the third step, and you can report it to your HR, you can report it to your manager. If your manager is the person that's being offensive, then you can report it to their manager, but report it. And part of the law is that now that you've reported it to a manager, the company's on notice and they have to look into what you've said. So that would involve them probably doing an investigation, speaking with the other person, speaking with witnesses to find out what happened. But again, they have to do something about it, okay? It's their job. They are required to do it. And again, it's your right to work somewhere that's respectful. So, the three things that you should do if you find yourself at work in a situation where you're being discriminated against or harassed, you want to respond as soon as possible. You want to document the transaction, the behaviors, the response, and your response to them, any witnesses, and then you want to report the behavior. I want to talk about two cases. One is from 2024 and then one is from 2018. We're going to talk about a situation where an employee was harassed at work, and we're going to talk about how these steps that we just talked about today should work for them or could have worked for them. So, our first case comes out of New Athens, Illinois, where the EEOC is suing a hog farm company for gender identity discrimination and harassment. This case or the information was released in March of 2024 by the EEOC. So you can find the details on their website in their press release section. The details are that this company, they allowed an employee to be harassed because of her sex and her gender identity, which forced her to quit. This employee started her transition a few years ago, and ever since she started the transition, the co-owner of the company made derogatory comments about her gender identity. And it was a lot of comments. The co-owner continued to call her by her old name, the name that she was before the transition, and then they continued to tell her that she was a guy. In addition to the co-owner's disrespect, a fellow employee touched her breasts, exposed his genitals to her, and also made unwanted comments and sexual advances to her. Now, when you think back to the steps that we talked about, the three steps: respond, document, and report. In this situation, when it came to the fellow employee, one of the things that she could have done, and Again, this article, the press release doesn't tell us how she handled it. I'm just walking you through it so that you know some things that you can do. With the fellow employee, she could have said something to that person to let them know that's not appropriate and documented the behavior, which it sounds like she did. She was able to report it. But when it comes to the co owner, that's a little bit tricky. When you think about the role of the co owner, the influence that the co owner has, it's intimidating. And I could definitely understand if this person was reluctant to report it or say anything about their behavior. It's the co owner. So, what I would encourage you to do is if you find yourself in a situation where it's somebody at the top, like the co owner, maybe go to the board of directors, someone that has influence over this person, maybe the other owner of the company you could go to. You can still go to HR. I would just caution you about going to HR because HR is in the line of authority. The owner is in their line of authority. So I don't know that HR would even be comfortable looking into this situation and that they would do a thorough job of looking into it just by mere position. So I caution you in that situation. So what this person did, because the company already knew about the behavior because it's the co-owner. The co-owner is the person that is using the derogatory terms. This is the person that's harassing her. So the fellow employee really is following in his footsteps, following his lead. So he's not leaving a good example. But again, she could not get the issue resolved internally, so she went out externally. And that's another option for you as an employee. If you don't get the issue resolved internally, you can go out to the local agency in your area that enforces anti discrimination laws. You can go to the state agency that enforces anti discrimination laws, or you can go to the EEOC. They are the federal agency that enforces discrimination laws. And do you have to try to get it resolved internally first? No, you don't. But for most of us, we just want to work, continue to make money to take care of our families. If I can get it resolved internally and get this behavior to stop, I'm good. Because really, I just want to come to work, do my job, take care of my family, and that's it. If you remember what I said earlier, that Title VII prohibits discrimination based on gender identity. Harassment based on gender identity is a form of sex discrimination. So it falls within the Title VII, within that act. So again, the behaviors described in this particular press release were offensive and just not handled properly. The next case I want to talk about is from 6 years ago, and this has to do with a retail company. And this retail company, it was a director who actually was harassing the VP, and they were harassing them because they were straight. So he called the VP Tommy straight. He drew genitalia on his whiteboard when he was out of the office for an extended period of time and ridiculed him because he was straight. And so the VP reported the behavior to HR, and HR did not do anything with that information. They didn't act on it. The behavior continued and it even got worse. So, this is a situation where I talked about if you go to HR, keep in mind that they may not do a good job or anything at all because of the person's position. So, those are some things you have to put in perspective when you run into the situation where you are harassed. The other thing to point out in both of these cases is that anybody can be the harasser. The roles do not matter. The first case, we have the co owner who was a part of the problem and making the statements. And then in the second case, it was a director actually harassing somebody in a higher position than him. So anybody can be the harasser. I do not want you to feel like you can't say anything or cannot do anything because of the person's position. Not true. You have resources. If you cannot get the issue addressed internally or resolved internally, you have external resources. If you are not comfortable even addressing it internally, you have external resources available to you. So, again, that's your local, state, and federal agencies that enforce anti discrimination laws. So, if you have a situation or concern that you like to discuss and like a consultation on, feel free to visit our website, eerightstoolkit.com. There's an option there for you to book a consultation, and we'll set up a time frame for us to have that conversation. But this brings us to the end of this podcast, and I'd like to always close out by reading you your employee Miranda rights. So let's do it. You have the right to not remain silent. Anything you say to HR can and shall be used to prevent further discriminatory acts in the workplace. You have the right to consult an employment attorney if the discriminatory acts continue. If you cannot afford an employment attorney, you can file a complaint with your local, state, or federal agency that enforces discrimination laws. If you decide to remain silent without addressing the disrespect, you risk experiencing bouts of stress and anxiety. Knowing and understanding your rights as I have explained them to you, are you willing to speak up for yourself? You have now been Mirandized. Be empowered, and I'll see you next time.